This podcast is brought to you by the American Enterprise Institute.
If you like what you hear, please subscribe, rate, review, and share.
Thanks for listening. Here's our show.
What the hell is going on?
What's really going on?
We said, what the hell happened? You don't have to know what the hell is on it.
They see what's going on.
I don't know what's going on. What is going on? We must find out what is going on.
Hi, I'm Danielle Pletka.
And I'm Mark Thiessen.
Welcome to our podcast. What the hell is going on? Mark, the youth version. What the hell is going on?
Well, that's what we're trying to find out, what's happening with these young people. It seems that they have very unconventional views. The Yale youth poll just came out, and it had some fascinating data on the breakdown, not just between Gen Z and the rest of the country, but within Gen Z, the differences of point of view. And the data point that absolutely jumped out at me was that voters aged 22 to 29 favored Democrats in the upcoming midterm elections. So generic ballot, which do you favor, Republicans or Democrats? Favored Democrats by 6.4 points. But those 18 to 21, the younger cohort, leaned Republican by 11.7 points, almost 12 points. So you're talking a huge demographic swing within Gen Z. And so we wanted to get to the bottom of what's going on with these younger Gen Z voters. And so we got the guy who founded the Yale Youth Poll to come in and talk to us about it.
Exactly. Now, look, this is really fascinating to me. And you and I talked during COVID about the truly radicalizing effect putting kids out of school was going to have.
Yep.
We've talked about the unbelievable radicalizing effect that social media has as well, which is, compartmenting young people into conservatives, liberals, men, women, straight, bi, Republican, no matter how recherché your identity is, social media will build an algorithm for you and reinforce that. And obviously, we've seen really bad elements of that, where people who used to live in their mom's basement believe that they're actually part of a larger community and should go out and act on their crazy views. But then there are other people who are looking for community here. And I think that has really ended up building this cohort of young people who look for a community online and who are conservative.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
What the famous phrase is that if you're conservative when you're young, you don't have a heart, and if you're not conservative when you're older, you don't have a brain. Is the tradition. It used to be people started out more liberal and became more conservative over time. So I'm fascinated to see how this 18 to 21-year-old demographic evolves going down as they get older and become more conservative. But I think there's some things that are not just. I mean, the online thing is obviously it's affecting everything. The TikTok and the algorithms, and we've talked about smartphones, and we've talked about Jonathan Haidt and his views on all that, and that's all true. But there's other things that are at play here. So if you think about the older Gen Z, they started college during Trump won, right? And that was their formative coming of age experience. These younger guys and girls started college in the Biden era. And with all the disasters around the world and in this country that came with that, their formative experience of government was the COVID lockdowns and being forced into online school and having their sports taken away from them and having all their activities taken away from them. And so they're naturally going to have a greater dislike and distrust of government and a greater loss of faith in institutions generally, because government and the public health institutions failed them dramatically. And so it's not surprising that they lean towards the candidate who is pushing against that and the party that seems to be pushing against that. And so I think that has a lot to do with it as well.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. In fact, one of these polls had a question in it, which was, do you support or oppose the following? Creation of the Federal Department of Government Efficiency. I think if you asked, there would be a very high correlation with Democrats obviously saying, no, this is Elon Musk trying to reform the federal government. Absolutely no. And obviously conservatives would say, for heaven's sake, this is absolutely necessary. here, what we have very interestingly is a pretty even split of 35% support and 38% oppose. And again, I think that is an indication that there's something going on. There's something going on with these
Yep.
young people, and that was in the Harvard Youth poll, that is causing a backlash against the left. And
Yep.
about damn time.
Yep. There's also Harvard Youth Poll, also another number which I saw this morning on Fox. So approval rating of congressional Democrats in the fall of 2020 among voters 18 to 29, it was 48%. Today, 23%.
Well, if you look at their average age, Mark, I don't know whether Nate had a really good piece about this, talking about the gerontocracy. And that is exactly right. I mean, it is insane how old this is. Not only are members incredibly old, but they're dropping dead. Right. So, I mean, Nate wrote about this, and quotes from a Politico interview that Connecticut Representative Jim Himes gave, where he said, quote, "There's no question that somewhere between 6 and a dozen of my colleagues are at a point where they're ... I don't think they have the faculties to do their job." You know, you and I know this. This is a phenomenon that you and I saw and used to laugh about from our youthful perch. But Senator Helms decided on his own to retire when he was 80. And all I can say is there are
Strom
lots
Thurmond
of
did
members.
not.
Strom Thurmond did not. Nancy Pelosi did not. Chuck Schumer did not. Does
Dianne
not.
Feinstein.
Right, and Dianne Feinstein, who died. I mean, or the member of Congress from Texas who hadn't voted for a few months, and that finally a hometown newspaper went and found her in an old age home. I mean, this is
Memory care facility. Yep.
It was worse yet. It was not just an old age home. It was a home for people with Alzheimer's or dementia. That it is, and the Democrats have been hardest hit by this. There's no question that the Democrats
and that reflects the approval of the Democratic Party more broadly. I think the approval of the Democrats as a party generally is among the general population is something like 29 to 30%. They've dug themselves into a huge hole. These kids grew up during the Biden era.
A precursor to the grave they're about to be in.
They saw the withdrawal from Afghanistan, and they saw inflation. They saw how it would have affected their families.
They saw Joe Biden, Mark.
And they saw Joe Biden.
That is huge.
So it's not surprising that the Democrats are responsible for turning young voters to the right. It's a fascinating development.
Yeah, no, it really is. And I want to talk about the counterculture, but let's go to our interview, and then we can talk about it in the outro. Milan Singh, really, God, Mark and I sound like unbelievable old people, but he really is an impressive young man. He's the founder and the director of the Yale Youth Poll. He's from Cambridge, Mass. He's a junior in Pearson, majoring in economics. He had previously worked as a researcher at the most millennial named organization ever, Slow Boring, and a data science fellow at Decision Desk HQ, which is something I know you and I both follow on Twitter. They're excellent. And he was a social policy intern at the Niskanen Center. This past summer, he worked as a consultant for Blueprint and Welcome Pack, and he is one of the opinion editors for the Yale Daily News.
Here's our interview. Well, Milan, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, great to be here. Thank you for having me on. I'm excited to talk about this stuff.
Well, thank you very much. I'm very excited to learn all about your poll and how you founded it and why you founded it. And, it's quite an accomplishment for someone your age. But I want to talk about your generation, and particularly one finding in your poll that really jumped out at me was that when the cohort of, you're looking at Gen Z broadly, but you broke it down and you found that voters 22 to 29 favored Democrats by 6.4 points. But when you looked at 18 to 21, they favored Republicans by almost 12 points. First of all, can you explain that? Like, why is that? What's going on? And what's the divide within Gen Z? Because us old people look at Gen Z as this blob. And there's really distinctions within younger Gen Z versus older Gen Z. I'd like to get your thoughts on why that is.
Right. So the R plus 12 versus D plus 6 number you're referring to is from our generic ballot question. For those who don't know, generic ballot is when you ask people, if the midterm elections for Congress in your district were held today, would you vote for the Democrat or the Republican? And so R plus 12 means that people aged 18 to 21 by 12 points favor the Republican candidate. D plus 6, people 22 to 29 favor the Democratic candidate. One thing I will say is that because it's fairly early out from the midterms, both of these age segments have about 1 in 5 people undecided. Now, that's not to say, those undecideds will all break for Democrats, all break for Republicans, all break 50-50. We don't know. But it's just something that people should keep in mind. But you're right. We did see a divide throughout our poll between younger Gen Z, 18 to 21, and older Gen Z, 22 to 29. It's not just a generic ballot. So, for example, we took a look at the favorability for President Trump. Among voters aged 18 to 21, the president's favorability was +3. That is to say, the share of people with a favorable opinion of him, less those with an unfavorable opinion. The result was 3 points. Among 22 to 29, the president was -6, and among all voters, he was -5. When you look at specific issues, for example, whether the U.S. should continue or end military aid to Ukraine, whether transgender women should be allowed to play on women's college sports teams, or whether the level of legal immigration should be decreased, increased, or stay the same, you find a similar gap where younger Gen Z voters, 18 to 21, are more conservative than older Gen Z voters, 22 to 29, and in some cases are even more conservative than the electorate overall, for example, on Ukraine aid.
So this is fascinating and weird, actually. Kudos to you for digging this up. You know, it reminds me, Mark and I always have on our friend Roger Zackheim from the Reagan Foundation to talk about the poll that they do on foreign policy. And one of the things they do is split out Republicans, MAGA and non-MAGA Republicans. Again, I think teasing out these nuances inside the cohorts is really a great new way to go at this. I just cannot believe this 18-point swing. And all I can do is ask you, as one of the pollsters and the founder of this poll, why?
Right. So I would say there are 3 big reasons. I'm not saying these are the only 3 reasons. I'm saying these are the 3 reasons that to me jump out as the most significant. It's possible I'm missing something, et cetera, et cetera. But first, I would say is ideological sorting among young non-white voters. Second is social media driving gender polarization among young people in particular. And third, I would say, is dissatisfaction with inflation and with post-pandemic life and the post-pandemic economy in particular. So in the first one, if you look at CCES data for the 2024 election and you break it out by, say, Black voters and Hispanic voters, and within that you break them out by people who self-identify as liberal, conservative, or moderate. Among Black voters who are over 65 and self-identify as conservative, Kamala Harris won a large majority. I mean, like 2/3 or over 2/3. Similarly, she won about 1 in 5 self-identified conservative Hispanics over the age of 65. Among young people under the age of 25, Harris won about 5% of conservative Hispanics and under 50% of self-identified conservative Black people. I think that's important. Black and Hispanic voters are more likely to self-identify as moderate or conservative than white Democrats. Not than white voters, but than white Democrats. That's an important distinction. And what that means is that historically Democrats have enjoyed a large majority or have been able to win a large majority of the votes of non-white moderates and conservatives. That's not the case anymore. With the younger generation, people are increasingly voting on the basis of their ideology. And that means that as we have generational replacement, which is to say older people eventually pass away, younger people turn 18 and are eligible to vote, the effect is that the non-white vote becomes less Democratic and more Republican. And because the young generation is more non-white than older generations, that effect reduces Democratic vote share among this demographic. So that's one reason.
It's incredible, but I have to ask you what I suspect is probably not a terribly erudite question. What happens when you turn 21 or 22?
I think that part of that kind of gets at my third reason. 21 and 22-year-olds are, the reason that's the cutoff in our data is just the age options we gave people were 18 to 21, 22 to 29, 30 to 44, 45 to 64, and then 65 plus. So, if we had more fine-grained data on, if we asked people exactly, give us your exact age, you could generate a plot with a smooth line. David Shore has a plot like that he shared in his interview on the Ezra Klein show, and that shows a similar relationship. It's not a large discontinuous jump right around 21. It's more of a curvy line. I think the reason, though, why younger Gen Z is more conservative in their policy preferences, in their voting choice than older Gen Z, and I guess I fall right in the middle because I'm 22, is the pandemic. If you're 18 to 21, you went to most of high school during COVID. If you were in college or if you're in the workforce now, your formative years have been in the post-COVID economy. And, if your first experiences in the workforce are with high inflation, you feel like, oh, prices are too high, I'm frustrated by that. If you are fed up with, wokeness or perceived overreaches by left-wing institutions or actors or movements, I think that's understandable why that pushes people in a more conservative direction. If you see a president who's visibly too old to do the job well, you can understand why that sours your impression of his party. I will say one other thing is that I wouldn't know about this because I was about 5 when Obama was elected, but my understanding is that about 20 years ago, if you were young and you were liberal, that was kind of a countercultural thing, right? A lot of your parents' generation were Bush Republicans, and so being a young liberal was a way to kind of be against the mainstream. And I think that for many people in my generation, a lot of cultural tastemakers, celebrities, actors, musicians, pretty clearly have personally liberal politics, and that's fine. But in a way that makes being conservative kind of the new counterculture. And I think that plays a role as well. I don't know how much of a role that plays. That's kind of more of a, maybe you could say, a fuzzy judgment or a not super empirical claim, but I do think it is there and a factor.
So talk a little bit about the gender disparity, which was your second, I believe, because one of the things that was interesting, I don't have the exit polls in front of me, but Gen Z men voted
Right.
for Trump, whereas Gen Z women voted more for Harris. So overall, Gen Z moved to the right, but it was driven by, in a way, by the frat bros who were raising the American flag during the Hamas protests. And, there seemed to be sort of a counterculture movement within younger college men. Is that fair? And what do you think? How did the divide come out through in your poll?
The divide we observed in our data was more between men and women rather than college and non-college. But
Okay.
yes, you are correct that there is a gender gap. Again, I'm going to cite some of David Shore's numbers because his sample size was 8 million and my sample size was 4,000. But this is all stuff that he talked about on the Ezra Klein show. His data found that among voters under 26, Trump won non-white men, white women. So Harris won non-white women under 26, but every other group voted for Trump on net. And you back that out, probably means Trump carried voters under 26 outright, unless his margins among, say, white men and white women were very narrow and he got blown out of the water with non-white women, which seems unlikely. We did observe some gaps as well ourselves. So if you look at, say, net favorability for the two presidential candidates this last cycle, among men 18 to 21, Trump was +7, Harris was -48. That is to say, only 24% of men 21 and under had a positive impression of Kamala Harris. 72% had a negative impression. So this isn't something that can be chalked up to a lack of name recognition. It's also worth noting that among this group, when we asked them the generic ballot question, men 18 to 21 were R+19. So it can't be explained only by this group is just generally super conservative. Part of it is that they are more conservative, but part of it is that they uniquely did not like Kamala Harris. As to why that's the case, I think the theory that best fits the data is that this is a social media driven phenomenon. If these days social media, YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, are the dominant modes of media consumption for people my age, and obviously there are, say, TV shows that are more targeted towards women, TV shows that are more targeted towards men, but by and large, TV shows cannot be super segmented in which gender they target. If you go on, suppose, Instagram Reels and you watch UFC clips, your algorithm will quickly sort you as, oh, this is a young man, and you'll get recommended content that's more appealing to young men. And you can very quickly end up in, say, a male-only online space or a female-only online space. I think this is a degree of market segmentation by gender in terms of what media people consume that we really have not seen at any point in human history. I think that also during COVID, a lot of social life for people my age shifted online because of lockdowns and things of that nature. And I think that kind of accelerated this sorting into different online environments. You know, any guy my age, most of them will if I say, like, do you know who Andrew Huberman is? Whether or not they listen to his podcast, they'll probably say, yeah, I've heard of him. None of my female friends know who Andrew Huberman is.
Danny's saying, I don't know who Andrew Huberman is.
Right.
I don't know who Andrew Huberman is.
Andrew Huberman is like a fitness
at your age, you're not
health
supposed to know.
influencer. Yeah, he's just a fitness and health influencer, and he's popular with a lot of guys who are into the gym and like self-improvement generally. But I think that these polarized online environments can lead to people having more polarized views. For example, if you look at some data, this is data out of Norway. This goes back to 1990, and the question asked is, do you agree that, quote, gender equality has gone too far, end quote? And it's broken out by, say, men 30 plus, men 19 to 29, boys 15 to 18, and the same for women. And over the last 7 years, the share of boys 15 to 18 saying, I agree gender equality has gone too far, has jumped from about 11-12% to just under 25%. And I think that this time period from roughly 2018 to present neatly overlaps with the rise of social media as the dominant mode of communication, arguably of socialization among people my age. This is some data that Pat Ruffini has shared on his Substack, but the gender gap is a lot lower among married people than among unmarried people. And I think part of that is if you have a spouse who's typically of the opposite sex, you know, they kind of, you're forced to see the other gender's perspective. Right. You kind of have to understand where other people are coming from. But if you're single and, there's all this data saying, oh, young people aren't dating, young people aren't hanging out anymore, and you're primarily socializing online, it's easier to I'm kind of beating around the bush here, but
just say it.
It's
Married
easier to
conservative.
get yourself into a mindset where you hold very stereotypical views of the other gender, and you assume, all women are, hate men, feminists all hate men, or, all men are predators, if you are not actually interacting with other people. I think that plays a significant role there.
So I want to come back to this counterculture thing because I think it's really fascinating. Abe Greenwald, who writes a daily thing for Commentary Magazine, wrote something about this. And what he called it was, get ready for the right-wing 1960s. Mark and I were not participants in the Haight-Ashbury generation because we're, thank God, a little bit too young. But you can really see that. And he writes, the MAGA right not only offers an escape from the madness, it does exactly what the hippie left did in the 1960s, legitimizes and validates immaturity in all of its indulgence. You can call people names, whine about being victimized, and then become president. You can obsess on conspiracies and machismo and become a media superstar or a cabinet member, and you never have to lose your juvenile combativeness. The message isn't quite tune in, turn on, and drop out. It's more like buy in, log on, and curse out. But there's a celebration of sort of the same kind of thing. Now, obviously, not all of MAGA is immature, and not all podcasters are Joe Rogan, although he is the biggest one who is Joe Rogan. But this counterculture idea, I think, is really appealing, anti-establishment, against your parents. And I wonder if, as somebody at Yale who is engaging in this and paying attention to it, whether you see it, as Mark alluded to, with professors who note this kind of thing.
I think there's definitely something there. I do agree that I think it is countercultural. This is not an academia thing, but if you look at, say, the big social media influencers, Logan Paul, Nelk Boys, Andrew Schultz, none of them are partisans, right? Their content is not political at its core. Theo Vaughn is another one. But all of them interviewed Donald Trump in the lead up to the election, and all of them are more Republican friendly. They don't mind doing things that are against PC culture, being edgy, being politically incorrect. So I think that's one sense in which being conservative is kind of countercultural. I think in terms of what's going on at universities, yeah, I think a lot of students who have more conservative views do feel that they are victimized or that they are judged for being conservative. And I think some of them do kind of take pride in that, or, in the same way the left has sort of a victimhood culture of, oh, I'm oppressed, I should get these special favors. I do think that is increasingly something you see with political conservatives at certain university campuses. One thing I've noticed is that some of my friends who are conservative at Yale will, you talk to someone and they'll be like, oh, hey, by the way, like, I'm a conservative, I like Donald Trump. And I'll be like, yeah, I could tell. Like, yeah, so what? But, like, you can tell that some of these guys, and it's primarily guys, have only talked to other conservatives about actual policy issues. And so they've never heard a critical take on what they believe. And so I think in some ways that can undermine critical thinking and the ability to have a productive back and forth conversation in the same ways that liberals or leftists who don't want to engage with right-wing persons, right-wing ideas can similarly have sort of a more impoverished worldview and understanding of things.
But isn't that kind of what they're rebelling against to some extent? Because it's, one of the reasons why they may not have had those conversations is because cancel culture, right? If you say certain things, you're going to pay a social price for that. You could pay an academic price for it. Okay, professors are, you can't have those conversations, and they're kind of sick of it. So isn't that both part of the problem, but also part of the rebellion?
In some sense, but I do think that people, at least where I'm at, I can't speak for everywhere, somewhat overrate the extent to which, or somewhat overestimate the size of potential social backlash to having conservative views. Yes, most faculty members and most students at school here are liberal. Most of them are also not, I will not be friends with you if you're a conservative. They might say, if we talk about politics, I'll say I disagree with you and I'll say I think you're wrong and here's why. But they won't say, oh, I'll never speak to you again and I will tell all my friends you're an evil person. There are some prominent professors who are on the more conservative side of things, and their classes get plenty of students and they're well respected here.
Yeah.
So in a lot of the election post-mortems, you had pollsters, kind of serious guys. One of our colleagues, Rui Teixeira, who writes a lot about this for the Liberal Patriot, but also Nate Silver and others, have written about the fact that the real transformation in terms of voting patterns is that people are no longer voting based on their level of education and the color of their skin. They're voting based on class. And that the real divide among voters is between poor Black people and rich Black people, poor Hispanics and rich Hispanics, poor white and rich white. And, again, these are all caricatures, but that is why you're seeing this leaching of minority votes to the Republican Party. And it's obviously pretty dramatic for everybody to be talking about it. Is this also a factor in what you see as that divide, or less so among Gen Z?
So I've read a good amount of Roy's stuff. I always, maybe I misread him, but I thought that his read was that education was the proxy that we use for class. Maybe
I think, listen, that education level is the proxy,
right.
But because we don't talk about class anymore, but that's fundamentally what it is.
Yeah, I think that there's a degree to which that's true. There's a lot of evidence that as societies get richer, people vote more and more on their views on social or cultural issues, and those are views where people who have a postgraduate degree have very different opinions than people who finish high school and work with their hands. I think it is a factor. I think with regard to Black voters specifically, actually, the higher education, the more likely they are to vote Republican, and the lower education, lower class, the more likely you are to vote Democrat. Part of that might just be a very materialist story of like, oh, I don't want Medicaid to be cut. versus I would like my taxes to be cut, or versus I make enough money and I have conservative views on social issues and I'd like to vote for the party that aligns with me on that. What I will just say is my personal view of all this is that I think that there is a reason that Fox News always talks about transgender, illegal immigrants, the border, wokeness, whatever batshit stuff is happening at universities, because they don't want to talk about what do mainstream conservative economists think the minimum wage should be, 0. What do mainstream conservative economists and Republican Hill staffers think the corporate tax rate should be, lower? And what do mainstream conservatives and Republican economists think about Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid? They should be cut, because they know that most people don't agree with them on that. And I think that Lyndon Johnson put it best. If you can convince the lowest white man that he is higher than the highest black man, not only will he not notice that you're picking his pocket, he will hand over his wallet to you. So that's kind of my read of things.
Wow. I will pass on responding to that as a Fox News contributor. But here's another question for you as to why this generation, the role that COVID played in the conservatism of the 18 to 21 cohort, the younger Gen Z.
Right.
So a lot of the older Gen Z graduated before COVID hit, right? And so they formed their views in a pre-COVID world. For younger Gen Z, their formative experience of government and institutions was keeping them out of school and telling them they had to do online school and all the COVID lockdowns and all the rest of that. And that may have formed a sort of an anti-establishment, anti-institutional, anti-government point of view that most people only come to later in life when wisdom kicks in.
Right.
So talk to us a little bit. Do you agree with that thesis? And what does your poll say about views of trust in institutions, trust in government among the different cohorts?
Right. So I think you're absolutely right on that. I think I will say I myself was frustrated that in Massachusetts we had schools shut down, but the bars were open. I like going to the bar, but it's not as important as making sure people know they're reading and writing. And I think that is correct. We did not ask a ton of questions in detail on, say, how much do you trust government? How much faith do you have in government? We asked some indirect questions. One question result we asked that I found interesting, we asked 2 questions about the Supreme Court. And the first was whether people think the Supreme Court mostly rules on the legal merits of cases or mostly rules with the intent of advantaging a particular political party or ideological group. We gave people 2 messages, each were like 2 sentences, and we said, which comes closer to your view? Among voters overall, they narrowly, I think like 44, 42, or maybe 46, 42, favor Supreme Court rules mostly on the legal merits. Among people under 30, something like 45, 39, they think that the Supreme Court mostly rules to advantage one political party or ideological group. The second question we asked was what people think the judiciary's role should be. One stance was kind of the line that some people in the Trump administration have been taking, the vice president, Elon Musk, that when judges issue these national injunctions that prevent an elected president from enacting the policies he wants to enact, this is anti-democratic, this threatens our democratic system, this is no longer democracy, we have judicial activists running the show. The other stance is, I think, what probably the mainstream legal commentator, and you might criticize that commentator, you might not, say, which is, hey, we have a system of checks and balances. If a judge says something is unconstitutional, the president should obey that ruling and then, appeal it, go through the rest of the process if you want. We found that people overall, 62% said presidents should follow judicial rules. But among young people, 73 or 74% say the president should follow judicial rulings. So you have an interesting situation. And again, this is one question. Maybe I'm overreading it, that more research is probably needed. But when you ask people, do they trust the court to make unbiased decisions, young people are more likely to say, no, they don't, that this is a partisan institution. But when you ask them whether the president should listen to courts or not, they're more likely to say yes. We also asked, do you know which party appointed a majority of justices on the Supreme Court? And people know that it's, most justices were appointed by a Republican president. So it's not that people are unaware of this or think the Supreme Court is democratic or something. I think that's interesting. Yeah.
So tell me why you founded this poll which is actually, I mean, look, it's fascinating because actually what you see is that polls tend to be dominated by obviously people more people like Mark and me who are more likely to answer their phone, whether it's their cell or to have a home phone or to answer a survey. And the older you get, the more likely you are. But of course, there is this huge disconnect. And I'm really curious, what prompted you to found the Yale Youth Poll and how much support did you get for it from Yale?
Well, I won't disclose the dollar amount.
I
I
mean,
don't know if I'm allowed to, but
I
so
didn't mean the moral
I got
support.
the idea last summer. We'd seen a lot of discourse over the summer and during the election campaign about the youth vote, right? Trump's going on podcasts, Harris is going on Call Her Daddy, he's going on Rogan. Is the youth vote up for grabs? Turns out the answer is yes. And I thought, well, it'd be nice to have more data on this because a lot of these articles, not to denigrate the journalists, but are written more on speculation or on I interviewed 5 people. Here's what they said. I thought that more data would be beneficial. Harvard has a youth poll. They do a really good job. They have some really interesting questions, but it's still only one poll. Each poll is one data point. Even for I'm proud of the work we did. I know the entire process. From writing the questions to getting the data to we did all of it. But it's still one data point. And the best practice with any poll is throw it in the average and see what it says, right? There are some polls that have come out recently on Trump's approval with young people. Some of them say it's lower than what we found. Some of them say it's higher. Throw it in the average and find out. So I thought there was a need for more data in this space. People, think tankers like yourselves, journalists, just citizens who want to know what people are thinking in their country, politicians can have more information. I mean, we are the future, people my age. Eventually, all of us, everyone in this country will be us eventually. So it doesn't hurt to have a better picture of what we think, and then people can use that data to inform their worldview and have more information with which to make decisions. Also, I thought it was cool. In terms of support, Professor Kalla, I'd be remiss not to thank him. He was absolutely instrumental in helping me apply for funding, putting together the team, and he's been very supportive throughout, as well as the rest of the people at the ISPS in the political science department.
Well, you're a very impressive young man, and this poll is really impressive. Is this what you want to do with your life? Are you going to be the next Mark Penn? Are you going to be the next Kellyanne Conway? Are you going to be
Nate Silver?
Probably not her. Probably not her. I don't know
what I mean.
I'd like
well-known
to.
pollsters.
I'd like to. Well, I'd like to get a job after I graduate, so I'll leave it at that.
I think a lot of your generation is worried about that too.
Yeah, no, listen, I mean, it was really interesting to watch the controversy over polling that happened after this election. But for us, this was absolutely fascinating. And, whether it's Kellyanne or it's Nate Silver or it's Ann Seltzer that you choose to emulate, you're doing a great job.
Thank you.
I am really looking forward to seeing a next iteration of this. Is this your baby or is this going to continue once you graduate?
If I do my job right, this will continue after I graduate. We'll be putting together some stuff for the fall poll towards the end of this summer. And then after that, over Christmas break next year, we'll be putting together the spring poll. And then I'll be handing it on to my classmates.
Good for you.
Awesome.
Kudos. I am sure it will help you in the job market. And I'm with Mark. Super impressive and really interesting. I can't wait to see what these 18 to 21-year-olds turn into.
Yeah.
We've got a few of them, Danny. We've got a live experiment going on, you and I.
That's correct. Mark and I have 8 kids between us. So
oh, wow.
We that's right. We can skew the average, although my voting age is all on the left, Mark. So there you go. Anyway, Milan, thank you very much.
So what do you think, Danny?
So I really like this idea of these conservative young people being the hippies of the 21st century, right? That they're looking at their parents who are on the left. They're looking at national media, which is on the left, except for a few exceptions. They're looking at their professors, who are certainly on the left, with very few exceptions. And they're like, we're rebels. We're conservatives.
I love that, and it really goes back to the roots of conservatism under Bill Buckley. Because when did the modern conservative movement start? In the 60s as well. It was the rebellion against the rebellion. right? Bill Buckley started with God and Man at Yale. He founded National Review. He made conservatism cool. And then it became stodgy for a while in the views of younger people. And now it's becoming cool again. And you've got, as you said, a lot of these influencers, these comedians, everybody. I remember during the Madison Square Garden rally when this comedian Kill Tony came out and made a joke about Puerto Rico being garbage. And everybody's like, oh my God, all of us people our age was like, that's horrible. It's going to alienate Hispanics and everybody. And all the young people said, oh my God, Trump had Kill Tony at his rally. We love Kill Tony. So I was just the other day, I was watching the Tom Brady roast on Netflix, which is
that's hilarious.
absolutely the most hilarious thing I've ever watched. It's 3 hours of nonstop, irreverent, comedy. But Kill Tony was there, and he was hilarious. I get why these people like him. The older folks.
That roast, Mark, propelled Nikki Glaser into the stratosphere.
Oh, Nikki Glaser is so funny.
She was hilarious.
Yeah, but I mean, all of our kids knew who these people were before old people like us turned on our Netflix and saw the roast, and so, who's Nikki Glaser? They've been following Nikki Glaser forever. They've been following Kill Tony forever. So, these people are pushing back on the PC, pushing back on all of this. And I think it's driving, I think you're right. It's the counterculture. And then I think also the other thing we should talk about is there really is a gender divide going on, which is fascinating.
Yeah, boys are far more conservative than girls.
And then you saw that in the exit polls where the I think 55% of 18 to 29-year-old males voted for Donald Trump. And it's interesting. There was a poll that I just saw this on Twitter. So they asked voters' opinions of Donald Trump, okay? White men with no college degree, plus 41. White men with college degree, plus 1. White women with no degree, plus 14. White college women, minus 38.
Damn.
And you can go down on other things. Views of the Democratic Party. White men with no degree, minus 58. White men with no degree, minus 58. White men with college, minus 38. White women with no degree, minus 36. White women with college degree, minus 4. So even they have a negative view of the Democratic Party. I mean, there is a huge, we got a problem with college-educated women in America.
Well, again, I mean, I think that it used to be that college-educated women or women in general tended to vote like their husband. And, you and I talked about this actually on the pod about,
another countercultural rebellion.
The marriage effect. But look, at the end of the day, that is a divide worth noticing. And it's a divide that the Republican Party can do something to try to bridge. But the divide that you could not figure out how to bridge. Remember Rock the Vote? Remember all of those unbelievably lame efforts to try to get kids out? And, they bring Beyonce on stage and they bring Katy Perry, that dingbat, and all of these other people.
She's an astronaut now.
Is she now? And a professor of science. But no, listen, again, the real question about these guys will be, do they vote? Will they vote? Conservatives tend to vote. And will this 18 to 21 generation turn into a group of young people who vote? It'll be absolutely fascinating to watch. But I thought Donald Trump, give him credit, he ran a very, very clever campaign toward that generation, and he got rewarded for it.
Yep. And I will tell you, I like you and like so many people, was so proud of the frat boys I think it was at USC when the Hamas protesters took down the flag. They took it back and raised it up the flagpole again. There is something going on, and that's the other thing we didn't talk about, is the effect of these campus protests on these younger people. The pro-Hamas, pro-terror people allowing to run rampant. I think this has radicalized a younger generation of college-educated people in this country. They've seen the ugly face of anti-Semitism, the ugly face of anti-Americanism, and how it's affected them, how they can't get to class, or their classes are canceled, their access to education because these people are being coddled by the institutions they put their trusts in, by the left, but I mean institutions generally, and they've had it. So I think this 18 to 21 cohort right now, they could save America. God bless them.
Well, we'll see, Mark. We shall see. I'll be watching with great interest in my later years. You and I
in
from
your
the memory
dotage
care facility. Anyway, thanks, folks, for listening. Thanks again, Milan, for joining us, and we'll see you next week.
Take care.
Let us know what topics you'd like us to cover. You can get in touch with the show by emailing us at whatthehell@aei.org.
Or you can reach us on Twitter. I'm at @dpletka.
And I'm at Mark Thiessen. That's Mark with a C.
Please rate and review the podcast. If you like the show, please subscribe, share it, comment on Apple Podcasts, or wherever you're listening to this.
Thanks for listening.